Good evening and welcome to Embracing Diversity, an online diversity initiative where we discuss race concerns and embrace diversity and inclusion. Tonight's topic is implicit bias. What is it and how can we combat it? Now for our host and moderator, Reverend Vickiel Hughes.
Good evening, everyone. This is Embracing Diversity. Now, I just want to give a little background since this is our first live dialogue for this year, 2021. In June 2020, I did a thing. I brought an in-person diversity initiative that I'd started in seminary in 2016 to the internet. And we were initially called Diversity Matters, formerly called Diversity Matters. Now we are Embracing Diversity. We started out with 8 founding panelists. It was a very diverse group, I might add. I want to read their names this evening. Bennett Williamson, Rosa Delgado, Jasmine Newton, Brother Efren Juan Muhammad, Reverend Eleazar Partido, Amy Gowdy, Reverend Patrick Jones, and Tangela Cameron. Since June 2020, our pool of panelists has grown to over 35 individuals across the country, West Coast to East Coast. And on bi-weekly Wednesdays, groups of them have met online every other Wednesday, like I said, to dialogue about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We've tackled current events and long-time, deep-rooted societal ills. So tonight, here we meet again. I believe I have 7 panelists on with me this evening. And again, I'm Reverend Vickiel Hughes, the creator, host, moderator of Embracing Diversity. Tonight's topic is implicit bias. Some people may also know that term or phrase as unconscious bias. You're gonna learn what it's all about and how to combat it tonight. And I actually have at least one expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion on here with us tonight. I want to define implicit bias. It is defined as unconscious associations and judgments that largely influence our social behavior. Things like how we view certain people or groups, who we avoid, how we favor certain people when hiring and socializing and things like that. In an article called 2 Types of Biases, attorney Kimberly Papillon said this: implicit bias is dangerous. It automatically seeps into a person's affect or behavior and is outside of the full awareness of that person. It interferes with our decision-making and relationship building. So let's talk. I want to first call on a few panelists. Maybe if 2 or 3 of you all could give examples of implicit bias, maybe in the school system, in our personal lives, and in the workplace. And of course, we all know what happened last Wednesday, so we will be dialoguing about that at some point in this next 90 minutes, but we're gonna talk about different types of implicit bias. So again, if 2 or 3 of you, if you all would just take 2 or 3 minutes and give some examples of implicit bias for the audience, that would be great. Anybody want to start?
I can start.
Okay.
My example is, I'm like textbook, because I am a freshman teacher in a high school, and I teach in, it's probably, I'd say 60% white, probably more Latinos than Blacks, and then actually the Blacks and the Asians might be equal. And so teaching freshmen coming in from, the middle school, I'm pretty sure I'm the only Black teacher some of them have ever had. And I'm the only Black teacher. There are other Blacks on staff, but I'm the only Black instructor. And so, you know, of course, they come with whatever notions because I am Black. And then I always tell them, I tell my colleagues that, you know, when I tell the kids no, it's different than when you tell the kids no. Or when I give a criticism, it's different coming out of a Black face than it is, coming from them. So I do catch some flack almost every year from one or two parents, you know, because I'm Black, you know, it's just that they have this notion of whatever I am saying or whatever comment I have made. And so that comes from their biases, you know, I guess, you know, that I'm the angry Black woman. Or, you know, I just have, I don't know, some chip on my shoulder.
Wow. Does anybody want to respond to that? What Lisa just said?
I definitely agree with Lisa's comment. Coming from an educational background, I get it. You know, as a person of color and being an instructor, and then when you have to discipline, you know, it's the tone is different.
Yes.
The tone is different. You know, you're too hard on us, or, you know, whatever those comments that come from parents. And for me, it comes from, I feel like I have a high expectation of myself and my students. And so if I'm holding you accountable, and that means I'm the angry Black woman, then, you know, I guess that's what it is. It's unfortunate. But yeah, I can definitely understand and empathize with that comment that, you know, the way a person of color interacts in the world of education, it's different.
Yeah, because like, even if I stop them, you know, like for a dress code violation, or if I am doing some kind of correction to some student, you know, they've gone to the dean sometimes and said that I humiliated them.
Right.
You know, that they were just, oh my, you know, that humiliate was the word, and was maybe not intimidate, but humiliation and something else.
Sometimes they'll say that I have a friend who has really fought through this situation almost her whole educational career. And it's aggressive isn't the right word, but it's like they'll try to say that, oh, you embarrassed me. You called me out in front of everybody, and
right.
You know, now my feelings are hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Dr. Graham, do you want to respond to either one of these ladies?
Well, you know, the first thing I started thinking about is how much of this is actually explicit bias as opposed to implicit. I think that there are times when we are very conscious about what we are thinking and the perceptions that we have. I think that oftentimes, while I do believe in implicit bias, I think that it becomes sometimes a politically overused term in the sense that it provides some people cover for their behavior. And so I'm not always sure in every incident, without knowing everything, that the notion of this angry Black woman, and I would really, sometimes when we have these conversations, like to unpackage that historically. Where did it come from? Because we often talk about issues like this, implicit bias, diversity, but we don't talk about how we got here. And I think that says a lot about, you know, where we are today, that we think of things as just is, as opposed to them having a history.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. Dr. Graham, could you tell us what your career is, what your job is?
Currently, I'm a senior policy advisor for the city of Richmond for all of their wealth building and some of their equity initiatives. And I'm also a professor of contemporary history.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, and everybody, Lisa Brunson is one of my Spelman sisters, and she's actually a teacher. And you also heard from Stephanie Davis, who is a school counselor, and she is a counselor. She has her own practice as well. So I forgot to mention that. If you all could say your careers as you all begin to talk. Can somebody give me an example of, let's see, so we talked about, well, actually school and work. Does anybody have an example, a personal example, maybe in your neighborhood or just in your community of implicit bias that you experienced?
I was gonna raise a story that was familiar. Patrick just mentioned Richmond, Virginia. My mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law, Frances McClenny, was one of the first teachers to integrate Ginter Park Elementary School back in the 60s. And I remember the first day that she goes into the school, she was cleaning the blackboards off in the classroom. And the first mother brought her son into the classroom. And the mother and son look up at the woman at the blackboard cleaning the classroom. And the son turns to his mother and says, "Mama, is the maid going to teach?" I.e., this notion that someone in this skin color, fair-skinned African-American woman, someone in her skin color must be the maid. The sort of notion that this is sort of underneath the surface. It doesn't have to be planned. It doesn't have to be practiced, but it's just there as part of who we are in larger society. I think implicit bias grows in such significant ways. When I think about the larger community in which we live, I wonder how much implicit bias was behind the reaction to President Barack Obama, i.e. the implicit bias that's there that undergirds people's white supremacist notions about superiority versus inferiority. To see an African-American man that could perform at a high level, that was incredibly competent, automatically seemed as though something is wrong. And part of implicit bias perpetuates larger notions of stereotypes and things of this nature. And if you disrupt that with an example outside of it, implicit bias disrupts your self-understanding. It can collapse your entire ego identity because you've presented an ideology that is inconsistent with what its basic assumptions are.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. Does anybody want to reply to that?
Well, I don't know if you're going to get to it, but I just think that so much of this comes from, like the doctor said, we don't take time to unpack things. And so, time just keeps going on year after year. A child may have, may not even have the notion that she was the maid, that was the maid, but then because it's never checked, that the lady is the maid. If the parent never presents a situation where a Black person is anything but the maid, I guess the Black people are going to be the maid.
That's true. That's true. Okay, I'm sorry. A few people have joined. Okay. So, my mother, Evelyn Hughes, is a retired teacher. So do you have any comments, Mother Evelyn?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
That's good. Well, several comments. I was the first and only Black teacher at my elementary school. I was a third grade teacher. I've been retired for 25 years now. So what I experienced happened 30 years ago or 35 years ago or so. One thing, for instance, if I was standing talking to 3 white teachers, the fourth white teacher walks up, and guess what? She looks at the other three as we're all talking, but she never looked at me. So I was someone who always confronted whatever was going on. So I just asked this teacher if she were talking to me also. Therefore, we had to have a conversation. I think many times it's just normal for people to behave as if minorities are not present because they have that ingrained in them. Therefore, whatever they're doing, 9 times out of 10, they're not including anyone other than their own race or culture. And I think it is true sometimes with any group of people. I recall one teacher mentioning that she would just move north if the children from the city came to our school system. There was a law passed so that children could be bused to the suburbs around where I taught. So this was a big deal to a lot of people. And therefore, there was a lot of discussion. And when a teacher said that she would just move north, that was a problem. And she voiced it, but I did discuss it with her. I think many times if we can make sure that we talk to whoever is presenting something that's negative, and make sure that they know that we know what's going on, and try to resolve the issue. I didn't have a lot of trouble with the parents. One of the reasons is because I always tried to be in front of the problem and make sure that I had done my background work so that I was right about whatever the issue was. And it worked basically most of the time. So I'll turn it over to someone else.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, just the only thing I would say is that what is interesting about Sister Evelyn Hughes' story is that she becomes a teacher really on the cusp of integration. And when I think about how many Black educators and how their presence in communities prior to desegregation was so elevated, and how even as you desegregated schools, all the data showed that they actually were just as competent, sometimes more competent than their white counterparts. But when we actually began to desegregate, we began to cut out Black educators. And then they had to be reintroduced into the system. But part of that cutting out had to do with another form of implicit bias that just suggested that they weren't as capable or as intelligent as their white counterparts. And even more interesting to me is that a lot of that developed out of some very intentional bias before desegregation. So I just find her story interesting because of the timing of it. And I think, again, that goes back to us not really exploring enough how we get there to really understand and unpackage it.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. Anybody have any other examples before we move on? I definitely want to get to last Wednesday and what's going on for the last week in the news. But does anybody have any comments, other comments? If not, so last Wednesday, we experienced what I would call when old America meets new America. There was an insurrection by a mostly white crowd that occurred on the same day that a Black man made history in the political realm in Georgia. He made history as the first Black senator-elect in Georgia. Last Wednesday, we saw what implicit bias looks like when it sits and stews in the minds of numerous people. They will destruct property, injure, kill people for their ingrained beliefs. People like this will do sinful things, and if they're from the right race, white, they can often walk away unscathed. Lakeisha, do you want to comment about last Wednesday and just what has gone on since then? This is our diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist this evening. So I know some of you all, other people on here have done diversity work, but I wanted her to kind of start this part of the conversation.
Good afternoon, well, evening, everybody. I'm Lakeisha, and like she said, I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant. I help businesses large and small utilize DE&I to gain that competitive edge. And implicit biases, those unconscious biases that we speak of tonight, I just wanted to take it back to what Dr. Graham was saying, was how did we get here? And in our socialization process, we learned from an early age, Black and brown history has been erased. It's been changed. The narrative has changed in our school systems. So when you're drawing these conclusions, your brain has this information packed away for you, and you use it whenever you need it. The brain has so much information to hold. So this looks like microaggressions of crossing the street when you see Black and brown people, thinking that someone that is Latino, is can't speak English, even if they were born here. You automatically assume that they came from another country versus being born and raised here. So yes, cultural memory. And it takes all of that to grow in how this social media, all those media platforms target certain populations, and you see this information, you're limited to what you have to draw upon. So that's how these unconscious biases creep in, and you're like, how could somebody really believe that this is the way things should be, right? And they go over and take over the Capitol. Well, it's really simple, because they're not exposed to different cultures other than their own. They have the same messaging that, white is right and white supremacy is the way of life. And if you're not introduced to any other information other than that, it's very easy to get a mass mob. And I let people talk about their education level. That's another unconscious bias, to assume that someone who would do something like this is uneducated, because many of them are politicians, police officers, military people who have education and background, but it's limited by where they have grown up or who they've been exposed to. I've been in the military 21 years, and with that, I meet people who have never seen Black people or Hispanic people until they join the military. This is their first time being exposed to people of different backgrounds, and it's a hard process for them to understand. This is what I've grown up learning, Black equals danger, Hispanics are here to take our jobs, white people are supreme. This is religion around it, everything. So it's very easy to get from point A to point Z when you have those conditions brewing, like you said, over years. So the Capitol incident, of course, how someone could, the leader, I'm trying to be careful with my wordings here, as you can see, you have someone in a leadership position, the highest position in our country, who's giving the same messaging that they've grown up with. And this is why it was easy to have them report to the Capitol and take over, because in their eyes, everything they know is correct and right is being questioned, might be taken away. How are we going to let them take over? You know, it's the them versus us situation, and it's scary. You know, it's just like the reverse for us, feeling like we're in danger, and this is what's going to happen if a mob was to attack us. You feel danger, you want to figure out how you're going to fix this, and for them, violence. They believed it was, you know, protesting, but that was not protesting. Democracy, everything this country is built on, was in danger that day, you know. So implicit biases move quickly to explicit biases, which is how you see that unconscious, just ingrained cultural memory, and then it coming out to being completely racially motivated. And now you know what you're doing is not right. You know, that's how we got to the Capitol. I mean, it's very easy to incite people with a leader that is giving you these messaging. You know, Hitler is a perfect example of how you can get people to commit such grievous acts who probably normally wouldn't have, had they not received this messaging that this is what has to happen or we are going to be extinct.
Absolutely. I see a few other people on. Could I call on Melissa Sexton? Let's see if she's available to talk. Hello.
Can you? Yeah, I'm a little rough for the wear right now. This has been a really rough week.
Absolutely.
And I am trying to take care of myself right now. So it means I'm like falling apart. I just want to say one thing, and that is, ironically, even though I'm not showing myself, the comments about whiteness, about white people not seeing, man, I'm white too, and they haven't seen me either. And I wonder about why that is. And I spent my whole life since I was in college and all the way up, I'm 50 something now, and working in a building. And I've gone many days where white people are in my presence, and they don't look me in the eye. They don't speak to me. They don't ask me how I am, even if I'm sharing an elevator. So, and it makes me sad. And so that is not just a particular experience for people of color. And I think it says a lot about what it means to be white in America, to be unconscious about seeing and seeing yourself being unable to see. And I don't want you to miss hearing me say, I share that with you. It's been a pain and a burden. And we've got a lot of work to do on what it means to deconstruct whiteness now, to set white people free from this craziness, because it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that has been an experience all of your life or in your adult life?
I went to Furman in Greenville, and I used to sit at tables alone, waiting on other people who were also alone to come and sit beside me. So I've always been in between white worlds and black worlds and not belonging to either. So anybody that belongs has a privilege that is shouldn't be taken for granted.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention Dr. Sexton is a licensed therapist, and she has done extensive work with race reconciliation, race relations. I think somebody was about to say something. In response to Dr. Sexton.
She said that Dr. Sexton said that she felt that we have to work on deconstructing the whiteness, or helping them to helping them to, I don't know, Dr. Sexton, you said something about they're needing help to do something.
Yeah, Rodney told me to turn my camera on, so I did.
Hi there, you look fine.
You do.
You know, I mean, we're in a difficult moment right now. And I just made a video not long ago myself, and I appreciate the work that Reverend Dr. Vicki is doing. I value her greatly. I value what Rodney does too. I don't know the rest of you, but I know the two of them. And we're in a really difficult moment in that for the first time, there's a critical mass of white people seeing themselves for who they are and how they've been and what the legacies are for 400 years. And I'm not saying have empathy for them, but I am asking, I guess, because this is my family. If I have a people, these are my people. And they didn't get here overnight. They had somebody come along and take advantage of their insecurities and their fears and their anxieties and feed them a storyline that they could buy into. And they need to be deprogrammed now. We need to be deprogrammed now. I see Rodney raising his hand. So deconstructing whiteness, I'll sum up. Deconstructing whiteness means taking a reckoning of a historical legacy that someone, if they have consciousness, may not actually choose for themselves.
I just wanted to say thank you for your comments there, Melissa. I think we often think about race, and we talk about race as though it is an issue primarily for those who are racialized, i.e. Black and brown bodies in this context. But the thing I think that we don't realize is that race impacts everyone, and negatively. Though it does give whites a distinct advantage, though it does provide access to privilege, it tears down the possibility of community, which is a detriment to everyone, but one of the things it does is it creates a great chasm between people whose otherwise their issues should align them. So I often think about the way that we reflect on the fusion political party of the Reconstruction period here in North Carolina, which was potent and became such a significant threat that we had to have a coup to overthrow the government of Wilmington. And in part, the reason it was so effective was it showed poor white people and poor Black people that their interests were very much alike. And they began to work together and began to forge real change together. This is one of the things that race does. Race prevents us from recognizing the fact that we could do much better, all of us as a society, if we work together by creating a fictive barrier. It gives white people a slightly higher advantage so that they can look down on somebody else. Poor white folks can look down on somebody else. And because of that, it prevents them both from realizing if we were actually to work together, we could all do much better in this larger system. Race is a problem, not just for Black and brown bodies, it's a problem for all of us, which is a reason we should do something about it. I'll shut up after I say this. Right now in Charlotte, we're in the process of doing a truth and reconciliation process. We call it RAP Track. You can look it up at Facebook, RAPTRACC. And what RAP Track is an attempt to say the concept of race itself has destroyed our ability to be what we're supposed to be as America, a nation that holds these truths to be self-evident, that all human beings are created equal. As long as this exists, we will never be the America that we could be. As long as this exists, Black and brown bodies will always suffer. And as long as this exists, we will all suffer because we never recognize the fullness of the fact that we're all created a B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God, and therefore each and every one of us is equal in inherent value.
Dr. Stella, could you repeat the acronym, please?
RAP Track, RAP:TRACC. On Facebook, we don't have a colon. It's this RAP and then TRACC. And it stands for the Reimagine America Project, Truth, Reconciliation, Atonement Commission, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Does anybody else want to talk about the events of the last week or whatever you'd like to bring up? Anybody? Actually, let me make sure. Let's see. I think everyone has spoken. Is Kathy still on? Kathy Levenhagen?
Spoken, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this last week was just so disheartening for me. You know, when I saw what was happening at the Capitol, I'd worked in DC for a while. And so to me, it's such kind of a home to me. And to see that type of destruction and then to see people doing selfies with the police officers inside the Capitol, that just was appalling to me. I mean, the whole thing was just appalling. And then when you start looking at it compared to other events that have gone on this year and why we prepare for different events over something there. I mean, to me, it's a ways to go from the ellipse to the Capitol. And how did they not notice that there are a bunch of people walking down the street to get there or hanging out outside the Capitol and be better prepared? That's where I just question. You know, they felt like it wasn't going to be a problem, and these people were a problem, and it just saddens me deeply. And you know, it's hard to place it someplace, I guess, sometimes, because it's not right to do the destruction. To me, I don't like any of the destruction that goes on, but it's just so wrong that they would treat it as such an event where they obviously didn't think it was going to be a big event. And I'm like, how do you not see this as a big event? I guess that's where I question and I have problems.
The only answer I have to that is because they were white. Well, evidently they thought that because they were white, they weren't going to, you know, cross the line or however that was, or that they didn't need the protection. And then, I don't know, it just comes across, seems like other things were in place too, because when they did ask for assistance from the National Guard, it can't, you know, it was slow in coming. So what was that about, you know?
Yeah, and that doesn't make sense either. I mean, I understand that they have to go to the assistant deputy, whatever, to get, I guess it had to come from Pence at that point to call it on, but it almost seemed like there was something else involved there that delayed things intentionally. And that is, I feel things will come out as they get into it deeper, but it's just such a sad time, you know, to me. Everything in this last year there have been so many sad events, so many deaths, so many injuries that are just sad. You know, yes, they've caused people to get up in arms, but why do we have to wait till it's that point before we're up in arms? Why do people have to die?
So was Dr. Sexton saying that she felt like some whites felt that they had been duped, you know, in going along to a certain point with these people, that they didn't expect it to go where it went, and so they felt tricked? Is that what she was saying?
Oh, no, I couldn't say that that's what she's saying at all. I will say this, and I just want to just make one point about the whole notion, Dr. Sexton talking about, you know, white folks needing help with some of this. It's one of the things she did say.
She did.
Black folks are not required at this point to help white folks do anything.
I wholeheartedly agree.
What will have to happen is that those conversations internally with people like her will have to occur within white communities more frequently. That's not to be harsh. I'm just giving you a state of mind, because it's very difficult for you to infiltrate a community and actually persuade them when that has to happen within a community. Just like many of the things that Black folks deal with have to happen within their community. I think the other thing is, when I think about what happened there, I see three forms of bias. And I think Lakeisha sort of alludes to it a little bit, and that is you have implicit, and then there's what I call transitional. It is when you're either transitioning between explicit to implicit or implicit to explicit. Most of the implicit bias we have is socially constructed and started with some explicit or intentional forms of bias. And over time, they mutate into implicit form. So it's just like taking the scientific notion of transition bias, which is actually about mutation. So I think that that's what happens oftentimes. But what I saw in DC were very intentional planned acts. And so I tend to err more on the side that they are more intentional and explicit. I believe that because of that, one of the things that I think has been a burden for many Black folks is that we've often been put into the position as being the gate crashers for democracy. So if you think about Reconstruction, Dr. Sadler mentioned Reconstruction. It was the desire of slaves for education that spurs on the Freedmen's Bureau to actually focus on education, help open up some of our public schools, and then not only did Black folks get to go, but poor whites got to go. It was during the civil rights period, our great transformation of society, that Black folks, in their desire, not just for desegregation, not just for voting rights, but to be recognized in this democracy for who they were, opens the door for gay liberations rights, opens the door for a new women's movement, opens the door for a Chicano movement. Every time we have been placed in that position, it is not a coincidence that our latest Me Too movements and others come after a Black Lives Matter and so forth, that all of these develop simultaneously. We have always been.
Uh-oh. Dr. Graham, did we lose you? Dr. Graham, are you still there?
That we take care of ourselves through this.
Oh, wait a minute.
I went out on you.
You froze for a
you
minute.
did a little bit for a short time. It looks like you're back.
I just want to make sure that we take care of ourselves in this mentally, because I think that 200 plus years, I'm not going to talk about the 400 of slavery, but 200 plus years of being gate crashers for democracy takes a toll.
You know, and I would agree with that. Earlier this year, but with all this, we've had a chance to watch a lot more TV than usual, but there was a great program on PBS about like the right for women to vote, and going back to that point of women's rights, and how like the Black women were fighting along with the white women, and yet they didn't get that right. And it was, you know, historically, you do need to take care of yourselves. I mean, and as a white person, somehow I need to be stronger. And, you know, I work with kids, I'm a teacher, and I work in work-based learning with getting kids into manufacturing jobs. And typically I work with a lot of young white men who are from suburbs and very biased. And to try to get them to open up at the ages of 17 and 18 is a struggle, that no matter what you say, there's always a talk back. There's always, I don't know how to even put it. It saddens me, and you keep pushing back in the ways that you can, because you don't want to get into a huge heated discussion, because at a point that doesn't help either. You know, it's trying to find ways for them to kind of open their eyes and their hearts and their minds. And it's got to be, to me, as much as it'd be great to have a big thing, sometimes I think you have to do it a little piece at a time and just kind of keep chipping away. At least that's, and maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. And maybe y'all have better strategies for me, because I feel like I try to do what I can, but it saddens me that at this age you have to, or this day, that you have to have these conversations and people can't be more open and willing to discuss and have a conversation and be open, a little more open-minded. I mean, some of the kids are just totally closed-minded, and they're like 17 years old. And I'm like, how can you be so closed-minded at 17? And that's what I find is really sad.
that socialization process that we talked about earlier. That's how they're so closed-minded. It's what they're learning from the day they're born until they're 17 and reach you. They're getting that same messaging of what's programmed in them, and unable to make that shift. So it's good that, I guess, you're introducing those new ideas, but the bigger problem is that these messages are still being sent, right? The school system hasn't caught up with reintroducing history and education in a way that includes Black and Brown history. We have a history. We have a history in the United States and outside globally that's not introduced to our kids as they're going through the school system, and it's left up to parents to introduce this real, or I will say real, sense of history to kids. So think about Columbus Day. You know, some states still celebrate Columbus Day, where others have it as Indigenous People Day. What is your state? What is your county doing? And is anybody petitioning to have it changed to Indigenous People Day? You know, we have to have these tough conversations, and race relations has always been taboo, and you shush when your child asks you why this person is this color and I'm not. When they come home, you know, from school, being introduced to the first brown person, and you're like, don't say that, that's not nice. Instead of explaining how melanin works, you have more melanin than the other kids in the class, and that's why you are brown. You know, I think I posted in my group today, I'm brown because I drank chocolate milk. It's a TED talk, and it kind of explains on like a kid level, like melanin, and how having these conversations is tough, but they have to start early. So until we have an education system that's willing to rewrite, get someone that is really going to write history in the way that it really happened, we're going to still run into the socialization process of ingraining people with the white messaging of supremacy.
And I think the hard part is that these kids are getting indoctrinated so young, and even when they get to school, by the time they get there, it's been so indoctrinated in them, and they haven't had exposure. You know, a lot of the kids I work with, they don't have exposure to people of color. They're in very Caucasian schools and have been brought up with this mindset. And I can think of one boy in particular who, you know, he's very proud that his grandfather never went, you know, graduated past 8th grade, and he's very proud that his uncle never finished school. And I'm like, how do I, you know, and tried to get him to understand he needs to get that high school diploma and how important that's going to be to him, and that education is important. And I look at how it's a struggle. It's a struggle because you are looking at this indoctrination that has occurred in his life for the last 17 years in an environment where they're very closed-minded.
Yeah, we have to create environments where having a high school diploma will be beneficial, but he's in an environment where it's not, you know, because he's white, he's able to survive with an eighth grade education. His skin color, his privilege, which gives you that automatic trust factor. So it's not required. So until you change those areas where 8th grade education is perfectly fine, we'll still, those cycles will just keep repeating themselves.
Yeah. And we will get him through high school. Let me tell you, we will get him through. He'll have a degree, but it's more his open-mindedness. And yet he's aware that he is closed-minded. And so I think that's just the step with him and with some of them, just to realize we are closed-minded and we've got to listen a little more and take in other ideas. And that's hard. You know, it's a small step, you know, when you need giant leaps sometimes.
Yes, I also implore white presenting and white people to listen to Black and brown people and their stories and believe their stories when they're told, and try not to compare. You know, you had it hard or you had it worse because you grew up in a trailer park, and you know what, you know, racism is because you live next to, you know, an Indian family. These stories that you feel give validation to Black and brown people's pain, while, you know, they're well-meaning and well-intentioned, it's a lot. We're tired, Black people are tired, and then sick and tired of being tired, right? So having that comparison, like, we need help from Black and Brown people, that you have to seek out educators in diversity, equity, inclusion, in race relations, these people who are charged here with doing this type of work, and not just someone that's Black or Brown. It's not every Black and Brown person's job to reprogram the country, so looking out for education and resources that will help you get there, not just from, the Black person who works down the hall to help you get there.
Chimamanda Adichie has a good TED talk on the danger of a single story, that, our stories are not singular. And so, like Dr. Graham said, I think that it's not upon us to do the work, and I'm not a relationship expert, but I'm, almost 60 years old. So in any relationship, you got to do the work. And so it's on the white people to have to do the work right now. And so, maybe, I don't know, maybe Vicki can talk about this, because in some ways, I just feel like it's something that had to happen. What happened Wednesday, it's something that maybe had to happen. And so from there, it's a jumping off into who we are really going to be, because that really was who we are. And so it's a jumping off into, we got to start telling the truth and teaching the truth and learning about, well, they have to learn about us, because we certainly know about them.
I often say this too, is that, it's the us versus them mentality is never going to get us to where we want to be. And everyone has to take it on as a personal problem, and having that empathy for people who don't look like you, who don't come from where you come from, and understanding their stories is the way for change. It's a we problem. And that's my whole modality, is it's all of our problem, because we're all here and we're all, being faced with the same issues and injustices and the social justice issues that are reoccurring. We just see a different story with a different face, the same story with a different face on it, and then say, this time it will be different, this time it will be different. But the same people are running the charge. So everyone has to take a piece of this problem in order for us to change it.
I agree 100% that it's a we problem. And we means everyone. Now, how do we, as citizens of the United States of America, function at this time? Don't we need to decide that we can do something to change how things ended up like they did last Wednesday? I grew up during segregation time. I'm 81 years old, so you can know that I saw the colored and white signs and everything that went on. The civil rights movement took place, and a lot of people participated and worked real hard. It wasn't just one race of people or one gender, or it was we, a we word, but it can be used to think about what we can do now, just like a lot of different people worked so hard to change America. And a lot of change did take place. Then we kind of fell apart over a period of time as we moved along. And when I say kind of fell apart, of course, you never have everyone doing the same thing, but we have too many people who are not engaged in progress activities. So back to the we need to try to get together with people who are not just like us. And in my mind, that means everyone. For instance, when Vicki grew up, she knew Kathy. I knew Kathy and her whole family. They didn't live far from where we live. I never thought of them in a negative way. And I'm sure they didn't think of us in a negative way. We work to make our community better. So how can we get together now? Do we have to have another 60s when the civil rights movement is what it's called, I guess, took place with help from different religions and everything. So what can we do?
What about, I realized I was muted. I've tried to talk a couple times, so thank you all for keeping the conversation going. I wanted to ask Stephanie, when we're talking about what can we do, I would love to see us all, start with these kids because they're about to grow up to become adults. So Stephanie, as a counselor, and I have retired educators, former educators on here, actually just about all of you, I think have taught in some way. What can we do? How can we get racial reconciliation, diversity programs, classes, training and everything more in these schools, whether it's elementary school, middle, high school, college age, we need to have more courses and training offered. How can we get more of that into these places? Anybody? Stephanie or anyone else can answer.
That's, ooh.
Reach them, need to reach them young.
We do. So I think my struggle, and I know I've been on your panel discussion several times, and sometimes I feel like I have to play the devil's advocate. But I know we're saying we need to work together, but at the same time, it often feels like people of color are the ones working the hardest.
Absolutely, that is true.
We're working the hardest, but we're also bumping heads. So at some point, we have to be comfortable having conversations. Just with what happened last week, I had several teachers ask, is it appropriate to talk about this in class tomorrow? How do I talk about this in class tomorrow? Is there a different way that a person of color as an educator approaches the conversation versus a white educator? How does that conversation go? How does it sound? What's the tone? What are the boundaries of that conversation? Especially if we're talking about, obviously, there are going to be children and young adults and teenagers who buy into the narrative that we witnessed last week. So if I'm having this conversation in my classroom and all of a sudden I have, the one child or two kids that are like, this is great. What they did was amazing. I wish I was there. Okay. So now how do we open up that conversation and be able to respect each other in that moment? And I don't know, like I know that we want to open up the dialogue and we want to have these conversations, but like for me, I feel like if I had the chance to sit down and talk to someone who was actually there, I can't say that I would be open-minded. I would probably be afraid. Like I'm sitting down across from someone who has no interest in who I am, has no buy-in, doesn't care what happens to me from today or tomorrow. Like, how do you have those conversations? We need to have them, but who's going to take the first step and open up that conversation? And a lot of times it's people of color that open up the dialogue, but then it's the opposite that's closing the door and saying, no, we don't want to talk about this. No, we need you to talk about this. We need you to hold yourselves accountable. I think Miss Sexton, when she was talking, you know, the word empathy comes to mind. And I'm going to be honest, when all that was happening at first, I got so nervous and I was just like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then I sat back and I was like, you know what? This is not my problem. Like, devil's advocate, this is not my problem. This does not have anything to do with me. Because if we want to talk about white privilege, what happened was all about white privilege. And I'm not white. So it's hard to stay connected in that conversation. It's hard to feel sorry for someone who says, oh, it was a peaceful protest. Okay, I've been to peaceful protests. It's hard for me to have empathy for you when you stormed the Capitol. That was not a peaceful protest. So it's a tug of war. We need these conversations, but can we be open enough to hear the other person? Can we take away that fear, take away that bias to have that conversation? I hope so, one day. Soon.
Yeah, I actually would love to have encountered that kid you were talking about who said, oh, you know, I wish I had been there.
Well, I was just using that as an example. I think it, like I was saying, it was a struggle that teachers were struggling with the idea. Can we have this conversation? But it's a conversation that needs to take place. As a counselor, I'm a realist. I believe in, let's talk about what's happening right now. Don't sugarcoat it. Let me know how you're feeling right now in this very moment. And we have to be honest with each other, and we have to be ready to listen, even when it's not what we want to hear. We have to be open-minded. And like I said, I'm going to be real. I don't know if even I could have that conversation, because when I look at it, I see white people storming the Capitol. I did see a couple of brown folks, and they made sure that, you know, we saw them. But then you're like, why are you there? What are you doing? You know, so I don't know. I don't know.
Well, going back to the kid, though, that would give me an opportunity to really unpack what they're feeling, and sure. Then I would have a chance to maybe change their mindset.
Right.
If the kid said, oh, I wish I was there, that's a perfect opportunity to try to change that person.
Right. And we can do that. I also feel like we have to have the tools and the training to do that, because I have to be able to talk to you without allowing my bias to come into the conversation. You know, I have to be able to, I have to be ready to hear you, even if I don't agree with you.
That's true. Very true. Anybody else have any comments? I see we have I'm looking at some comments here.
I was trying to post this quote by Baldwin, where it was talking about, you know, people having to, when they're facing that, good Lord, trying to do too much in Zoom. You know, they're facing that the ugliness is going to be painful. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it's what they have to do. That's what, you know, it's like birth. It's painful.
Right.
But it's going to be growth.
Right. And when we experience racism, it's painful. And so other people need to understand that it is painful, regardless of who it's happening to. It's painful, but we have to work through that pain to get to a better place.
Indeed. It looks like a few of the panelists have dropped off. I was going to say I've seen some comments. So, you know, some of the panelists are saying that, you know, there is pain, but truth narratives need to be told. but we have to tell them so that we can understand each other and empathize. I just heard somebody say, talk about empathy. There's this quote, and it's author unknown. I found this online earlier today, and it says, deconstructing our unconscious bias takes consistent work. We can't address it once and be done. We need to recognize these unwanted, deep-rooted beliefs and limit their influence on us. So yes, there is a lot of work to be done, and it can't just, change isn't going to happen overnight. So we need to recognize that. Does anybody else have any comments at this time?
I just wanted to jump in and lift up two of the words that I heard over and over again in this conversation. I remember Stephanie talking about it and Dr. Graham raising this issue a while ago about the issue of narrative. I think we have to begin to recognize that the way that we exist in this world, the biases that we have, that we see on a regular basis, are part of a larger narrative that's been told. The world, the way that we as human beings perceive the world is through narrative. And if we want to change the outcomes that we deal with, we're going to have to change the narrative. So how do we go about shifting this larger narrative so that we can get beyond the limitations of racialized thinking, so that we can get beyond the disparities that exist in our society? We've got to reimagine a narrative. I'm a biblical scholar, so one of our famous biblical scholars, a guy named Walter Brueggemann, talks about the role that we have is to present God's alternative vision, i.e. what it is that the world would look like if God set it up. So how do we begin to reimagine what we can be and then put that out there as something that we can live into, as opposed to the world in which we currently live? And the other one, I think Miss Mother Hughes lifted up the concept of relationship. We often, in these larger conversations, because the nature of systemic racism and the systemic issues of racism, lose sight of that notion of relationship. And relationship is such a significant concern. Dr. Mark Gopin works for the Carter Center and deals with the difficulties of bringing people together in conflict. One of the things he says is that change really comes about once people begin to be in relationship with each other and begin to develop a notion of connection to each other. They can begin to sense each other's pain, feel each other's issues, and understand each other's perspective a bit. So how do we foster a different notion of relationship on a corporate level? How do we foster a different sense of relationship that might give us the opportunity to begin to shift that overall narrative?
Well, I have I found this online earlier. I can't remember. Let's see. One of the articles I was looking at, it was just talking about being conscious of who you're around. Like, and there were some questions like, who are your best friends? Do they look like you? Where do you live? Do you live in a segregated neighborhood, or do you live with a mixture of people? Where do your kids attend school? If you date, are you open to dating outside of your race? Let's say, if you are sick, would you see a physician from another ethnicity? Do you have friends from the LGBTQ community? These are some things we can think about and be conscious of, surrounding ourselves with people different from us. That's how we get to know them and learn who they are, and actually really see our differences and try to bridge these gaps. That's one suggestion I have. Like I said, I found this in an article. While somebody else is talking, I'll find which article it is. I printed some off. Does anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, I will say, a lot of what you're speaking about alludes to this notion of segregation, both in the physical, spiritual, and mental sense. Mm-hmm. And as I was listening to Dr. Sadler and some others on this notion of a moral calling, when we think about, our American creed and who we want to be. I'll also say that, it's not just a moral issue. There are some very practical economic reasons why we should not be practicing supremacy and segregation. I'll give you a perfect example. I'm going to take it just really fast. Story of the 90s. I've used this in a lecture. In 1990, we ranked in the top 5 in education and health globally, 5th. But it was also, at that time, we had come to the height of the desegregation experiment that we had started with Thurgood Marshall and others. And during the 90s, we reversed 3 of the largest desegregation policies we had, even going back to Charlotte Mecklenburg versus Swan. And when we did that, by the middle of the 2000s, we had gone from 1990 to number 5 to number 27. We had now 75% of Black and brown youth and poor youth in segregated schools by that point. Also in the 90s, we implemented things like, obviously, our 3 strikes law, the criminalization of so many Black and brown folks. And so what I'm saying is that all of that during that period, all the backlash against the struggle to further live up to our democracy has now led us to rank lower in our globe in terms of education and our economy in many ways than it did before. And what's a shame is that we already knew this. During the 20th century, there was a reason why places like Mississippi, Louisiana, and others ranked lowest in economics and education. And the primary reason was they were preoccupied with suppressing Black folks and brown folks. What they didn't realize is that that was almost, in some cases, like Mississippi, 50% of their human asset. You can't suppress that much of your asset and then thrive. The reason that Charlotte ranked lowest in economic mobility was its ignorance of the way that it was suppressing parts of its population. So they figured, I'll import all my talent and I will ignore the Black and brown people and even poor whites. So I'm saying we have some real examples of how this impacts us all. And so it's not even just a question of morality, which I think is a big question, but it's also a question of our self-interest.
You made some really interesting points. I'm gonna take some notes here. Does anybody want to respond to what Dr. Graham just said?
Well, what do we feel were the driving, what was, if desegregation was a positive, that's what you were saying, Dr. Graham? It was a positive.
It started resulting in a cumulative positive, yes.
Right, it was a positive. And so what caused it, what caused the shift?
Well, what caused the shift is, first we have to realize that the minute that you had some of these laws passed, even Civil Rights Acts of 64, 65, housing in 68, et cetera, you already had a backlash that was brewing. You see that in the election of Nixon. You see that also in the election of Reagan. And so by the time you have an engine that's already rolling that is trying to push back those gains, and what's interesting is they almost try to push back immediately. I want you to think about, even today, you're going through that now. Think about some of the things that were put in place by Obama and how quickly we are trying to push and suppress those things. Healthcare for all, right? Even some of the inclusive notions that we're talking about. So they started right from the beginning. And by 90, they had gained enough steam, right? And we had already begun to segregate many of our districts. And obviously, we know now, since the gutting of the Civil Rights Act of 64, we already know that it's in and of itself has caused and even more gerrymandering of our districts and other places. But this is all a continuous process. I look at it as a formation or as a transformation over time. And it happens so subtly that by the time it hits you, it's like someone sneaking up on you in the night. You're already bopped over the head and unconscious.
Interesting. I just want, before we have about 10 minutes left, I just wanted to make a comment and see, whoever can respond to this. I want to go back to last Wednesday, and it looks like Lakeisha, she sent me a message saying that she was having problems with her internet, so she's dropped off. Lakeisha is the DEI consultant, and when she was on, she was saying that so a lot of the people who were there doing this destruction and everything else that happened last Wednesday, she described some of them as having professional type jobs. And so I'm just trying to wrap my mind around that. Why, yes, I know about white privilege, but if I was a white male, white woman, I don't know if I would have, as a professional person, I don't know if I would have risked whatever, my job, my life, whatever, to actually show up in Washington, D.C. and participate in this destruction, because even though there's white privilege, sometimes people are made examples. Like we know that, I don't know what the number is now, but I've heard 25 people were arrested. I know some people have been fired, not everybody who was there, but some people have been made examples of, and I wouldn't have wanted to have been that, one of those examples. So does anybody want to respond to that? I just can't even fathom, even though I have, white privilege, hatred, racism, I know all that, but why would somebody actually travel across the country to show up there and take chances like that?
Again, they never thought that was going to happen. They never thought that they were going to be put on blast. That's the right. They were crying like babies at the airport. What was the lady said? Well, I have 3 kids and blah blah blah. Then you had no business being there.
Mm-hmm. Right. I absolutely.
Just think that, and then watch their clapback will be cancel culture. You're trying to end me. Well, no, your actions have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say similar to that. I think people, when you hold a certain belief, you can become very passionate about it as well. So I don't know if it's an excuse for for these individuals or what it is, but I think passion, the adrenaline gets to flowing, and you don't think about the consequences. Even being on Facebook Live and having this conversation, am I risking my job? Is someone going to go back and tell my head of school, Miss Davis was on Facebook talking about racism? But I'm passionate about it, right?
Right.
I'm willing to take the risk. So, I just think you don't think it through. You don't, in the middle of that moment, you have a goal, you're trying to get there, no one's going to stop me. And then when I get stopped, it's, I'm getting ready to lose my job. Oh, you saw me? you recognize me. Now I got to pay the consequence, and I don't want to deal with the consequence. I just wanted to meet my goal. I just wanted to get there. So yeah, I think it's just, being passionate, not thinking about it, and just wanting what I want right now. I deserve this. I can have it because I said so. Mm-hmm. Privilege.
Yeah, we are definitely a me society.
And I think they got really caught up in the rhetoric of the leader who was like pushing them forward and saying, we're going together, and making it sound like there was support for this group. And, I think it's the heat of the moment, but I think there was this firing up of a group of people who he knew were angry for some reason. There's anger. And I think that just fueled them. And they thought they had support. I really think they thought they had the support of the leader, and he's not going to give anybody support, it seems. So,
what's funny to me is that he incited these people, and then he was nowhere around. He was not with them.
He was in a bunker.
Not even with them. He's back having his own party.
It's like, go ahead.
He kept always saying how Joe Biden was in a bunker.
I'll meet you there. Go ahead of me. I'll be there soon. Oh my goodness. I was gonna have everybody make some closing comments. We have about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to mention quickly though, the article I was talking about that was
sit down. And she said, I know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sounds like somebody's talking.
No,
I think they had to just address something with
Anybody else? Okay, let me mention the article really quick I was talking about that was asking the questions about who are your best friends, where do you live. It's called 4 Ways You Might Be Displaying Hidden Bias in Everyday Life. It's by Emanuela Grinberg with CNN, and this article was dated November 25th, 2015. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so somebody wanted to respond to what Stephanie was saying, I think, or I'm not sure. I thought I heard somebody talking, but I couldn't tell. Did somebody have a comment?
No, I don't think so. I think that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's ignorance is bliss until it actually is no longer an excuse.
That is very true. Okay, I think I mentioned to viewers a few of the panelists dropped off. Internet is something else. But anyway, so it looks like I have, let's see, six panelists still on with me. So I was going to give each of you a chance to, we have it looks like about 3 minutes left. If each of you would just make some closing comments, whatever you want to leave the viewers with. And I just wanted to mention, I know this is at the end of our dialogue, but if you did not share at the beginning, panelists and viewers, if you would please share this video, even if someone did not watch with us live, it will be saved. If you share it, people can watch it later. People need to hear what each of us had to say. So if you would please share. So again, if you six would, whatever you want to leave the viewers with, whatever you want to say about implicit bias, or any related topic, that would be great.
Well, I would like to say that I am extremely sad because we did make progress as a country during the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. President Obama was elected 2 times. I'm very, very sad that we are moving backward. And at this point, I hope that we can figure out some way to move forward again, because this is not good for anyone in this country.
Thank you, Mother Evelyn. Let's see, I guess I'll just call on people. Stephanie, if you would go next.
Sure, I'll go next. Just to, I guess, make it short and sweet. I think the first thing coming from a counselor's view would be to check your emotions. So when you find yourself in a situation, check your emotions, but also choose not to just make an impulsive reaction as well. Oh, there's a Black man coming towards me. I feel afraid. Do I have a reason to feel afraid? If we do, realistically, sure, be afraid. Black man, white woman, Black woman, whoever, be afraid. But check those emotions first. Kind of going back to the Karens, that latest incident with the lady in the phone attacking a teen. You have my phone. Okay, we all have iPhones. Does that give you a reason to tackle a child? And then I think the other thing is face your fears. And I feel like that's something that I'm doing now. Face your fear, face that feeling of being uncomfortable so that we can get to a point where we can work through that fear and that uncomfortable feeling to get to a place where we can try to understand each other.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. Kathy?
I guess for me, it's just try to have open minds and open hearts. Engage in conversations and reach out and talk to people that are different. There's a lot of people around who are really lonely right now and need somebody to talk to, and it's the time to reach out and talk.
I agree. This is this time of isolation. We're coming up on a year almost. In mid-March will be a year when people have been self-isolating, or they're supposed to have been anyway, with the pandemic going on. So, okay, let me call on Lisa. You're muted.
I feel like Miss Evelyn. I was so encouraged by, Obama getting elected, and I was like, oh, the kids, they, and even looking at my students, I see, white students, there's not this strong racist hint to them. They really want to get along and will get along. And I was telling my students today, because I didn't talk to them about it right after it happened last week. I said, we don't even know everything about it. So today we talked about fake news, and we looked at, what has happened. And I think that it's a small contingent, or comparatively, the racist and whatever, they're outnumbered. I really feel. And this is their last power grab, because it's inevitable. The tide is changing. And so, this growing that we have to do together is going to happen, whether they're ready or not. And so I'm hoping that we can give the young people that message that Dr. Graham said. We have to be together, and we have to know about one another. And I just want to be optimistic about it. I just think that it's going to, it will work itself out.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to call on Dr. Graham next.
I think that we have to be optimistic, or we wouldn't be here. You have to believe. And I do believe that there will be a changing of tide. I do believe, to your point, Lisa, that this is one of the last hiccups of a generation that will fade from this. But of course, power doesn't concede anything. So it's one of those things that, you know, with being steadfast, that we'll see it through. I think the other thing is, if I was to leave with anything, is that whatever power you have, small or large, use it for good. I think that oftentimes we get overwhelmed and just influence those things that you can't in your sphere. And that we all can be what I call Jedi advocates for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so with that, I'll just say, may the force be with you all.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Okay. Dr. Sadler, last but not least.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be with you tonight, Vicki. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for all being here together tonight. I just want to lift up a simple word, and it's probably the word we all think of as passé, and that's the word love. Jesus mentioned this long ago as the pathway towards a better future. And many of us try to dismiss this as sentimentalization or an overly romantic idea. But I think love is a dominant force, particularly the way it was understood in the Hebrew mindset. It was the notion of doing creative good on behalf of the other. When you said, when it said in Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself, it's not saying feel good about them. It's saying do those good things that you do for yourself for others. And if we begin to live in this way, I think it changes a lot. I think love conquers fear. And that's one of the dominant things that we've seen as a major motivating factor in the divisions that we see in society. Love helps us to see the value in each and every one of us, so it can help us to overcome the sort of differences that we see. And most of all, love helps us to do good for those who are other than us. So I think we might just need to go back to something simple. Jesus said, a new commandment I give to you. Let's take up that new commandment again.
Thank you, Dr. Sadler. I intentionally called on you last, the other minister here. You know, I have to add to what Dr. Sadler's saying and just talk about love. You know, as another minister, we were not put on this earth to hate each other and to have so much dysfunction going on. You know, we are supposed to love one another. I want to encourage people to engage in some self-awareness. I'm talking to viewers here and those of us on the panel. We all need to put in the work, engage in some self-awareness and expand your horizons, get to know people different from you. You know, intentionally seek out people different from you and form relationships, new friendships, talk to your neighbors, your coworkers. Just, you know, when you're in the grocery store, at the gas station, talk to people. That's how we are going to understand each other's differences and really embrace them and accept them. So those are my closing comments. We are supposed to love each other. It's a little after 10 o'clock, so I want to end here. Thank you all. I want to thank each and every one of my panelists, including a few who were dropped off. So again, thank you panelists, and thank you to all who are watching. And again, please share this video with others so that, you know, you can learn, they can learn more about implicit bias and just hear the things that we were talking about this evening to give us all things to think about. Again, thank you and good night.
Thank you.